Hey, Jake.
Hey, guys.
I got nervous without the president of the user group, by my side here. I was thinking, oh my God, what?
It's all good, man. It's all good.
Right on. Right on. Okay, people are starting to show up. I'm letting everybody know we're recording this, so just a heads up. A lot of people wanted, hey, Alex, looking good. A lot of people can't attend, but wanted to see the content. I'm really excited about tonight. I think this is going to be one of our, I don't want to say detailed, but potentially one of the more practical Vantage user groups we have. Hey, Anthony, thanks for joining us.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm really hoping that if you have Post Producer, or if you're thinking about it, or maybe if you don't know anything about it, that you really learn something tonight. Something new, something that gets you excited. Okay. All right, Dave's here too. Great. Thanks for joining, Dave.
Hey, Bobby, I'll be mobile, so I'll be in and out here.
Gotcha, Dave. And Dave, by the way, please jump in at any time, okay, if you feel like you have something to contribute.
You bet.
Michael, thanks for joining, Michael.
No problem. And a quick shout out to my friend Anthony Moda, who I haven't seen in years on end. It's Michael Thompson, buddy.
Hey, Mike, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Doing very well. Yourself? You still down
Excellent. Not bad.
Still with Discovery Scripts, food, whatever you want to call it?
No, I'm over at Vox Media now.
Oh, cool. We ought to connect.
Yes, definitely.
All right, I'll ping you a note. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well.
Awesome. So a bunch of people have just been joining in the last minute or two. We'll start up at 7:05 just to give people a little more grace. There's about 10 or 12 more people that have been invited. We'll see what happens. But we're just going to start off with just a couple of introductory remarks, and then we'll just get right into it. So I'm gonna throw out a question just for the early crowd, and I want to ask you. So let's say that you are interested in Post Producer. Do you have to buy a license to use it? Does anybody want to take that question?
42.
It's a yes, no.
I'm guessing no with cloud.
It's a no. You don't have to own a license. You could do this up in the cloud. Okay, cloud port, exactly. So if you're running Vantage version 8, you can get access to cloud port, and you could experiment with Post Producer or use it for the occasional need that requires it. All right, things are leveling off. So Jake, I'm gonna kick it off right now, and then I'm gonna hand it to you briefly for a couple of remarks. But again, I think thanks everybody for joining. For giving us some of your personal time. We try to do this once a quarter, roughly or so, and one of the things we really try to do is to get people from the community to contribute. So we're especially excited today because we have, Eric is raised his hand to share some thoughts, which I think is going to make this a particularly special user group meeting. And that being said, if anybody out there has some thoughts that they want to contribute as we go along, please jump in. Either just blurt, or if you want to be formal, you can raise your hand. Okay, but we're all friends here. This is a safe space. Okay. But with that said, Jake, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about the user group, mention the Slack channel, that kind of stuff?
Sure. For those of you who don't know, I'm Jacob Bregard. Everybody calls me Jake around here. I kind of run the Vantage user group Slack channel. Those of you who are in it know that it can be a great source of information and sometimes just a great source of complaining. It's good for both things, right? As all good user groups should be. So if you're not in it, or you know someone who should be in it or would like to be in it, then please shoot something out to Bob and he'll connect with me and we'll make sure that you get into the group. It's important to note that there are no Telestremians inside the user group. It's a completely safe space, so feel free to complain ad nauseum. And also, if you're filing a ticket and you have a critical issue, please post the ticket in the Slack channel. And sometimes many of us will also pile in and reference that same ticket, and we can actually control the development of the product. So the more you're engaged in the Slack channel, the better the product is. The more we use it, the better it is for Telestream. So I want to thank Dave and everyone else, and Bob, of course, for hosting these things and for allowing us some backstage access to Telestream information. And thanks, guys. But also, just enjoy, grab a beer.
Right on, Jake. Hey, I'm curious. What did Jake? What are like the maybe one or two like most common or most popular discussion topics on the Slack channel?
I'd have to double check, but I think that like the most recent stuff has been Dolby Vision, IMF, or metrics in the system.
But are people asking questions about like how to do something or
More
voicing problems?
often than not, it's someone's found a problem. They're trying to get
Solving
something done.
problems.
Solving problems. That's the most common usage, is solving problems. Hey, has anyone else done this? I'm trying to do this. I can't get this done. There's a lot of community input when that happens. So.
Well, that's great to know when you have problems that you don't necessarily have to be alone. Okay.
No.
Yes. Okay.
Like I said, if you file a support ticket for some critical issue, please let us all know. And when it has happened before, we've piled on.
Excellent.
Hey,
Thanks.
Jake, I got a question for you. What are we doing with our newfound member on the other side of the fence, Ted Summers? Is he still ninja participating in that Slack or what?
He's here right now. I'll let him answer that.
Oh.
Yeah, my account, you can deactivate it. I guess it's official now. So
I'm just joking. I thought it was funny because we had a very active community member who's now on our team, so he'll be presenting tonight for the first time. So
yeah,
kudos
Jake,
to
you
Ted.
should absolutely deactivate Ted's account. Okay.
All right, Ted's not telestreaming. Sorry, Ted, I'm gonna have to boot you.
Okay, cool. So the agenda today is going to be really focused on post producer, but also, as I mentioned during the case, I think we'll also be talking about CML, a component of post producer that's used in other ways, within Vantage and some of the Vantage options. And we just have two speakers tonight. We're going to start off. Eric is going to share some practical experiences that he's had with post producer. And then when he's done, Ted will come on and do some demonstrations. So Eric, with that being said, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. I'll share my screen. And as mentioned before, I think a handful of people have experience in this, so feel free to jump in, cut me off, totally fine. I'm interested to hear other people's experiences. So right now I'm here at MLB Network as a multimedia systems engineer. Before this, I was at NBC Universal for a time. And then before that, I was an ad distributor called Synchro Services that has since been scooped up by ER. But in each of these three companies, post producer was used to some extent, right? And in my experience, it's been either making CMLs that kind of stay static for the most part, that then you're subbing in variables in a Vantage job, right? Somehow derived in the workflow.
Well, hey Eric,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to jump in. Could you take a stab at defining what the CML is?
Sure. So it's essentially a really beefy EDL almost. So it's basically an XML where you can assemble and edit media, do more elaborate cutting than maybe you would do with, media trims or media expansions in a flip. It allows for, basic transitions, graphical overlays, audio overlays, that kind of stuff. And I'll have 2 examples just showing kind of those things. But as I said, they kind of generally fall into 2 parts. One is where you're making a skeleton that then you sub in from Vantage on like a per job basis, however you derive those variable values, or the other one where you're just making CMLs whole cloth from sort of a third-party system, or in my case at NBCU and here at MLBN, like an internally developed platform to write your CMLs for you. And then, as I mentioned with an asterisk at the bottom, it'll also, Post Producer will let you chunk through Final Cut Pro XMLs out of Adobe, which we use extensively here at MLBN, where you're basically just taking your sequence and sending it to Vantage to chunk through that as a render farm, essentially. So in the times that I've used the first general style of CML, where you're basically laying it out and putting in placeholders for variables for the Vantage workflow, those were frequently done in sort of like maybe information poor scenarios where you might not have a database to query or a platform to make your CMLs for you, or you might not know everything about the incoming media, and you can sort of enforce standards, right? So at an ad distributor, we were enforcing a very strict archive master standard. So we knew, for example, when your content started. We didn't necessarily need that hosted as like time code markers in a MAM. We just knew that was our format. We can trust it. And that'll be the example that I show. I've kind of recreated an old CML from way back when. And this is just sort of the decision making process in the past was like, well, is it worth it to like design your CML template, set up your workflow, like how many files you're going to be processing? Pretty much in every scenario that I used it, it was worthwhile. And there were many cases where I was like, no, we just get this done. And then I was like, I really wish that we just built like a CML and a conforming workflow to deal with this, because, you know, you keep running into that media. And happily, in a lot of these cases, you know, I've found that copying off your old work is almost always available when it comes to making CMLs or working with Post Producer, because you're solving a lot of the same media processing, you know, use cases. So here's that reslate CML. And again, this is one where maybe you don't have a MAM system to query. In this case, this was driven from a workflow portal to get these variables. And this is almost the entire document, except for I'm just truncated it to lose some of the closeouts for the segment and sequence. But otherwise, this is pretty much the whole thing. And this is the important stuff. So they always start with a source bin. For those who haven't looked at this before, essentially you're just listing your input media sources, and then you're defining a timeline edit basically from top to bottom instead of left to right, essentially. This one is pretty basic in that we have a hard-coded blank slate that's always going to be laid down at the start of your edit. And your second source is your original per the Vantage job binder. In this case, it came from a reslate catalog. And then these things that I put in bold, we're subbing in something that put, you know, somebody did data entry in a workflow portal. It could just as well be derived from maybe you enforce an input file naming convention where you can get the title, episode, and season from. Maybe you run an analysis to get the duration, but then essentially whatever in that session log you found for those variables just gets plugged in verbatim here.
And now, Eric, specifically, this XML, was this created by the workflow portal, the XML?
No, so in this case, it looked almost exactly like this, lived on our storage. This is sort of a recreation. And we just derived our original media nickname and our variables from somebody in the workflow portal. So this was something where, you know, for certain use cases, something would just land into the catalog and somebody would have to type up what's supposed to go on for, as you can see from the edit, the first 8 seconds of the video file, right? And that's why I kind of mentioned having sort of maybe a deficit as far as information, where instead of querying a system to figure out when your content starts, this one will only ever work if you want an 8-second slate, 2 seconds of black, and then content 10 seconds in, right? It's not going to work if you don't abide by those rules. And then little stuff like here, you know, we have 2 title layers and one was a copyright and we hard coded the copyright symbol so that our users didn't have to remember that alt, 225, whatever it is to type that, right? But then whatever they put in for the copyright is variabilized there. Obviously, this could have been a more elaborate, like instead of hard coding to always use the same slate, maybe you determine something about the media to find where it came from. Maybe depending on where it landed, you say, okay, in the Vantage workflow, it's this. So instead of having a hard coded path to a background video, it becomes a reference to nickname, right? So instead of original, maybe that's slate. And somewhere upstream in the Vantage workflow, you determined which was the appropriate slate, like what company it came from, something like that.
Mhm.
But this is more in the sort of build it once and it just works and it'll always do what it's going to do. And you can just chunk through a bunch of media with it. So the other like general scope that I've worked in is when you're making CMLs programmatically. So instead of laying it out ahead of time and leaving essentially placeholders for a Vantage workflow to insert data, you're just writing it. So in that case, I have a different CML to look at, but in that case, we wouldn't be referencing an original. The system writing the CML would be writing your path. And the same thing with title, duration, episode. You wouldn't see variable placeholders because it's just going to tell Vantage verbatim, here's what you're putting in your text layer, here's where your media is coming from, here's your in and out time codes, that kind of a thing. So this is really useful, and we use it extensively as the underlying tech for a lot of the NBC Universal content distribution to OTT and linear partners, where you're basically meeting partner specs. And you want to be able to host your movie or your TV seasons in one archive master, but every partner is going to have a different requirement. And of course, you don't want people actually cutting ad breaks to make them 5-second blocks instead of 2, and then keeping that around. So you don't want somebody to have to make that, and you definitely don't want to have to keep it. You just kind of want one single archive, and then from that, you'll make all of your partner derivatives. So in the case of NBCU, we had in excess of like 20,000 partner profiles, obviously with a lot of overlap, but all derived from the same archived master. And then on a per order basis, you're cutting it up, doing different tricks, reslating, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, if you don't have people editing stuff by hand, you're not going to have the common human error mistakes, which is nice. It's also great to take advantage of direct convert trimming when you're using like ProRes to do your conform. And then here's where I'd get like a little bit more high level as far as, when you're having a system to write a CML, most of the work that's involved in that is not actually writing the CML. Most of it is like getting your house in order to be able to do that, right? So you need a system like an asset management system that obviously is hosting the masters, keeping track of where they live, aging and retrieving them, storing all the metadata from which your CMLs will be derived. So I think I covered a lot of that here. And I'll probably end up repeating myself a lot, but what I think about these days, usually when I'm approaching something like this, is basically, do we have all the information that would be required here? And do we have the logical rule sets to achieve this, right? We need to make it predictable. You need to go to developers. We have an internal development team to say, here's all the info you're going to query. Here's how you have to lay it out to make the output media. And as long as it's, trustworthy, predictable, repetitive, it works really well. And this is just a general high level of sort of, the dream, where you have everything well sorted, living in one place. You have different people contributing to that to make that one sort of golden master that could then be used to make any possible derivative. Because obviously, these are complex problems, but at the end of the day, it's television or streaming shows. So you need a video, you need alternate audio, maybe different languages, maybe descriptive audio, you need captions. Our work, maybe if you were hosting that for overlays, transitions, slates, even if you wanted to host that somewhere that you can grab it from. And then something that's really big here at MLBN is a ton of metadata logging and timecode markers. So obviously, the hard part is sort of this whole cool little gear symbol that hides months of work. But then you have a platform where you have hopefully templates where you're saying, here's how X partner wants to get their media. You know, if it's really nice, you have like a front end that maybe super users can use that say, hey, they want bars and tone for a minute, then they want black, then they want slate, then they want program, they want 1 second black ad breaks, they want a seamless cut, they want textless at tail, whatever it is. You need something to then interact with your MAM database, pull the paths, retrieve the media if needed, pull your timecode markers for when your program and your ad breaks occur. And then from there, it's basic, just, you know, timecode math.
Well, and Eric, could that front end be like a nonlinear? Like could it be Premiere outputting a Final Cut XML?
I mean, we do a lot of Final Cut XMLs just to get stuff out of people's local Premiere environment when they're rendering, just so they can dish it out. Usually for this kind of front end, I have in mind essentially partner profiles, so you can just repetitively create their spec, right? So the conforming part of that is essentially, you know, the start of that story, and then maybe when you're done conforming it, you're going to transcode it, and then maybe you'll deliver it. You know, each one of those could and in my case often have been just different Vantage workflows that you're essentially tying together.
So, and when you say a partner profile, like a partner profile that's defined in via XML, is that right?
Yeah. So here, I think I can jump around, see if this will work.
Eric, are most of those part profiles, are they different, really temporal components, meaning there's a slightly different slate that needs to be done for 5 seconds versus 2 seconds, different bars, different blacks? Is that really what's varying there?
Yeah, that's just a huge amount of the work, not like necessarily human work, but just machine time, is just because it's not acceptable to ship one partner black breaks that are 1 second longer than the other partner, right?
Right.
Everybody
And-
wants something different, and you want the capability to basically create a menu. You've done all these different iterations for all these other previous delivery partners, so why not? So you have the skeletons where you can copy and you can build in your CML. So like a platform where you can say, all right, we signed on a new client. They want these 5 things. They really only want one new thing we've never done, but you can, you know, take and copy and paste from your other CMLs and your other skeletons. Is that kind of the road you're going for? Like a
Yeah, for sure. So in practice at like a previous company to this one, it literally was almost like a program builder kind of, right? So you're not necessarily even interacting with the CMLs themselves at all. In that case, you're interacting with the system that uses logic to build the CMLs. So the rule that says, okay, you know, take your program segments in and out, cut them, and then in between each instance of a program segment ending and the next one starting, you're going to put in the 2 second black slug, right? So when you're sort of adminning this, ideally, at least, you know, according to my preference, you almost never really see the CMLs unless you're troubleshooting something. And then in that case, yeah, it is a lot of just duplicating previous profiles because of, yeah, like you said, you don't want to reinvent the wheel for a slight tweak. Let's see if I lost this. And then that's mostly, I think for this slide, this doesn't show, I could have done a mock-up, but basically you'd see sort of however you'd want a content program builder, like header, yes or no, define the header, what order do these things occur in, something like that. Maybe no header and seamless cuts, they want picture to picture. That drives the creation of your CMLs that are then fed to the conform action that's building your program. So, you know, I've been in places where this slide here is like wishful thinking, where you have a bunch of disparate systems with different content, you know, not necessarily cohesive standards as far as ingest and logging. We're happily in a pretty good shape here at MLBM. We develop our own MAM that everyone uses. It's called Diamond. And in working on this kind of stuff, I'm actually directly working with the same team that builds the MAM. So a lot of it is sort of handoff where I'm building the Vantage side, laying out CML templates, and then sort of commenting them to sort of a patronizing degree to explain, here's how, you know, the rules follow to build this.
Right. And just to further emphasize it, the MAM is really important because it gives you a single reference point for all the content, contributing content bits, right?
Yep.
It's all coming from one place. If you had it in disparate repositories, it would just increase the complexity of referencing all the media bits, right, Eric?
Yeah, for sure. And when I've been talking to people, so I've been here at MLBN for just over 7 months. When I'm talking about leveraging post producer more, most of the hassle that I'm talking about lives outside of Vantage and outside of writing a CML. It's like, how do we get this place, all this stuff in one place? And going back to the original CML where we were basically building the structure and just plugging in variables to it, you needed your content to start 10 seconds in. Otherwise, you'd have a text overlay over your video, kind of a mistake. When you have a MAM that you're sort of providing rich metadata to and time code markers, you don't necessarily need to conform as strictly to a single archive standard, as long as you define what happens when, right? So instead of saying, the content creators gave us this much header, it's not going to line up with any of our profiles. You're more in a state where, okay, log it in, mark when the show starts, mark when the breaks are, and we don't really care because we're going to invent or entirely remove the header or add breaks, etc., reslate it, that kind of thing.
Right, just work with the lowest common denominators. But I think this brings out a nice point about post producers, that you can work with almost with any types of media, whether it's audio, video, graphics, captions, subtitles, and it could all be in one repository ideally.
Yeah, exactly. And when we're building these CMLs or working on a project to use post producer more elaborately, you don't develop one thing at the expense of others. Like if you wanted to start doing trimming and stitching and it's working well, and then you want to add overlaying, you're not really breaking the core functionality that you just put in. Like it still makes sense. Your CMLs might increase in their complexity, but as I said, it's a lot of repurposing. And once people kind of get used to how they flow, it's pretty straightforward on how to compose one. Even for
Right.
people like frequently who are not video people, you're saying, here's the list of source files that you have to query, put the paths in here. This is your first, segment marker, put this here, or add 2 seconds to the time. Like it's all logical, which I find is really nice.
That leads into an interesting question, and this is going to be something that Ted, I think, will be showing in the Vantage demos in terms of actually creating the CML. So I think what you're saying, Eric, is that you'll just go directly into the CML and tweak it to create a derivative as opposed to creating it from scratch. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. If you're working with something like this, where you're going to find the CML within a workflow and then use it and then plug in variables. Here's a good example, like, on their first title layer, we have positional data, right? If you want to wake up tomorrow and change where your stuff is, you're not going to have to remember how to do this if you built this CML a year ago. Just copy and paste it, change the pixel values, and see how it works out, right? Like in this case, our workflow that was driving this made some determinations on how many lines were in the slate. And then from that, it used a different CML that referenced a different text layer start time or start position, because we just kind of preferred how it looked. If you had a lot of lines, start it up higher. If you have fewer lines, start it more towards the middle. Probably putting too much thought in the aesthetics of our slates that nobody ever sees, but it let us do that.
Interesting.
And then, so in the case of a system that's sort of orchestrating your work, pulling masters, referencing templates on the logic to build a CML, probably you'll be also posting the jobs. So here's just an example. So I had this up briefly. This is just an example of pulling a master, putting in some black and some bars, right? And then mostly just in and out markers. Like this is a pretty basic one. And these comments are just sort of indicating what I would kind of say to a development team to explain to them how to derive these values. Right, so it's like query diamond, find where it is. If it's not there, retrieve it and put it somewhere, and then put that path in here, right? Maybe from the template, you have determined what kind of bars or what sort of video format you're working with, or what kind of slating, whatever creative stuff you want. Maybe that's living in the template. maybe that lives in your orchestration platform that's determining, okay, like what is the frame rate or what is the TV standard of the stuff I'm about to use? Okay, here's the kind of bars you would put. All those sort of logical determinations you can make upstream of the CML actually being composed. And then basic things like I mentioned. So in this case, we do some bars and then some black for 5 seconds, and then we're doing our program. And this assumes that the first frame of our content started 2 seconds into the master that's living in our MAM, right? And then say that it ends 2.5 minutes later. And then our next in mark is 2 seconds later, again, assuming we have 2-second black slugs. The product of this would be a seamless edit, right? So we just have no black ad breaks, kind of a deal. And again, very logical to explain if you had to transform any of these things. Maybe if we were in the example of the slate, maybe you tell them, hey, pull the episode name and the series name and put a hyphen between them, however you need to lay it out. Like usually it's just about querying an asset manager and doing some transformation of the data and then basically just publishing it in a CML format that's very predictable. All right, so this one is kind of like a pet project here I have at MLB, which is instead of, say, living with archive masters of content that was already created and then doing different renditions and cuts to, partner specifications, this is just making content with post-producer just whole cloth, right? So something that didn't previously exist instead of just changing the header on a film. This takes advantage of the fact that we know everything that happened at every baseball game and we have it all logged into a MAM. We know the highlights, we know the stats. We have automated and live captioning and produced captioning that's logged in and time stamped. So when I look at this, here's an example. So like obviously these Vantage workflows are very small, again, because you're mostly just entering the CML into a conform action. So in this case, we're posting, I meant to show, sorry for skipping around too much, but here we made our rich CML, we're making a cut of a film, and then you would post that to your conforming workflow referencing the CML as the input instead of any piece of media, right? And in that case, it's really nice that you can also include any other variables that you might anyway in Vantage. Maybe you want to have your conforming workflow forward to transcoding workflows downstream. If you have an orchestration platform, I kind of like keeping the workflows small and more granular where it's like a la carte, where you might be picking, okay, conforming it this way with this conforming workflow. And then once you're done, send it to this transcoding workflow. And when you're done, send it to this delivery workflow, that kind of thing. So we would have written this programmatically and referenced, put this somewhere where Vantage can reach it, and then reference it in a job submit to Vantage, and then any other info like where to put it when it's done, what to name it. Usually I like to have whatever the requesting system is specify its host and path for replies so that in your workflow, I just litter sort of notifies everywhere because we're constantly updating back to our dashboard saying like what it's up to on its latest move and, success and failure messaging. So here's something I had in mind. This wasn't a pitch that I made internally specifically, but we just have so much data in our asset management system
We're talking about QVC.
that we can just query. Like we have our timestamp transcripts with every game from the home feed and the away feed of what the announcers were saying. In this case, like, okay, find the stats of all the bunts. And we just know when in the game that happened. So we know when in the record feed it happened. And then these are your rule sets. So pull the paths and put it into the source bin at the top of the CML, right? Maybe you just hard code in your template that you have the standard MLB bumper intro. And then you say to your sort of template or your development team, okay, so grab the time code of when that bunt happened, subtract 5 seconds so we get a bit of a lead in. That's your in mark for your first clip. And then say 10 seconds after the bunt, that's your out mark. Maybe you have a graphical transition or just a general transition. Something that would be nice is have our sort of network branded lower thirds and like a variable text layer, you put in info about the games, because of course we know what game it was because we pulled it from that master.
Yep. This, Eric, this is this is a I'm not going to say common, but I have seen this use case described in multiple places. You know, when people have an archive of content and then they want to access it and assemble it in a particular way for delivery or play out or whatever it might be, you know, like you said. And I think the key is it goes back to where you started. You know, you need the rich metadata to find all of those plays, you know, involving a particular player that when they were bunting, right?
Right. Yeah, and I probably put it somewhere earlier in the slides, but just the concept of like, does this necessarily require human creativity? Like, you're not going to use post producer to have like narrative drama in like an episode of Ozark or something and like have it give you a sense of atmosphere. But if you have the potential of needing an army of people sitting in front of an editor, setting in and out markers and exporting MP4s day after day, 8 hours straight, you know, that doesn't require necessarily a person to do that on a per file basis. And then you kind of move it from doing, you know, human involved content creation to automated content creation with a human or a file based or both QC layer, right? So let it do its thing, have a review before it gets out the door, and flag and modify, you know, pieces of content as needed. And then an extension of this that we've kind of looked at recently is a lot of the more compelling machine learning logging technologies that are finding a lot of interesting use cases, particularly in sports, with like identifying players on a field from their jersey and stuff like that, finding instances of action. And then maybe you have a situation like this where you have all your work done, you have your logic built, you have your template built. It happens to deploy to a CML that's then, you know, used by a conform action and post producer to make it. But maybe on the front end, you're sort of scraping social media feeds to find out what people are talking about. And then maybe you're sort of searching through your system to find that. And then you're chunking, you know, montages together and saying, hey, maybe people care about this. You know, it might go kind of haywire. And that's when you know, sort of review your logic, but more importantly, just have a QC before it leaves the building. Right.
Yeah.
So because we're so information rich as a sports network, this sort of how I see us as sort of fertile ground for a lot of this content automation.
Well, I mean, and so I'm assuming you could do a quick montage of all of Albert Pujols' 703 home runs.
Yeah, there
right?
you go. I'm sure we could.
Yeah.
I was hoping
Right
today
on.
we'd have a montage of 62 home runs from Aaron Judge, but no luck, I don't think.
There you go. So if you see that montage, folks, on TV, you may know how it was created. Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And I think that's about it. Apologies if I jumped around a bit. But I'm sure that a lot of other people use this for very similar use cases. So I'm excited to see what everybody else is doing with this.
Well, let's take a stab at like trying to identify like the big takeaways from your presentation, Eric, because I think you started with like, you know, how essential it is to have a starting point, right? You want to have a starting point where all your content is in a manageable place and you have ideally rich metadata, right? Is that where it starts?
If I was going to build something today, definitely. You know,
Yeah.
because you have a lot of freedom on formats, content layouts, you know, as long as you know what it is
Mhm.
almost more important than what it is.
And then once there, you know, and then let's assume, you know, you have an idea of what you want to create. Then I think it really gets into how are you going to create the CML? Okay. Are you going to, you know, are you going to be able to create it programmatically? And if you have that rich metadata, if you have all that content in one repository, you may be able to, okay. Or, you know, are you going to create it, you know, more one-off type basis with you know, from a nonlinear editor, the workflow portal, et cetera, right? And I think this is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of getting into the details. You know, this is where Eric got really specific in his presentation because he was talking a lot about how CML could be reused, and he was showing you the actual CML and trying to parse it out to see how how the granular control you get once you get into the CML. Ted will show you a couple of ways with Vantage that you can create the CML as well.
Hey, Bob, I got a question for Eric when I get a chance here.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So, Eric, you've obviously been at Synchro NBC and now at MLB, and I've kind of seen your career journey. So congrats on all this, by the way. Very cool to see. What are we missing? What don't we have in there that you need? What do we, obviously we want to constantly be innovating. We want to constantly be improving, iterating the product. We make fixes, we make improvements, but is there anything in there that you need that's not in there right now that would make your life supremely better?
That's a good question. I think you may have stumped me only because all of my use cases are already accounted for, but maybe somebody else around here has something that they've run into. I know, for example, this is a shot in the dark, but I haven't had to deal with many hassles related to HDR stuff, only very slightly at NBCU when we were conforming. I don't know if there are any hiccups there, but otherwise, yeah, I mean, we're meeting our business use cases basically.
Okay. One of the things that we had on the drawing board years ago was a visualization tool so that you could, without media, visualize what the CML would actually give you. That sounds abstract without having a diagram to show you, but is that something that would be beneficial to you at all?
That would certainly help on our dev side.
That's what it was for. Yeah, it was a tool for development so they could say, hey, am I doing this correctly? Or the IDs match, right? Do I have ID 1 behind 2 when it's supposed to be in front of 2 or something like that? So
yeah, that would certainly be very useful. And I think a lot of the hassles involved with making something like that is similar to the hassle of us making our own front ends for people to make profiles for like delivery specs and stuff like that. But yeah, that would be super helpful.
Okay. Well, cool. Thanks for that presentation, man. I'll let other people ask questions. Good job.
Hey, this is Joe from NFL Films. I second what Eric just said about some sort of place where you can put all this in some profile and say this is for Hard Knocks, this is for Inside the NFL, and then you kind of have your delivery built. And I don't know if you guys have this product already, but the custom media team is spending all day doing this kind of stuff, and they keep asking me, and they build their own Vantage jobs, and they use Post Producer heavily already. But they just want to know, is there something else that we can do to start building templates out so that they can streamline these? And some of these get quite involved.
Joe, are you looking for like a library of Post Producer templates that you could reference via Matrix and then call them up based on the type of job? Hard Knocks gets CML, Hard Knocks, Sunday Melts get Sunday Melts. Is that what you're looking for? Without having to actually explicitly call them for every job?
Yeah, it was more like, because we don't have the whole, like Eric has a development team that's kind of developing on with him alongside him when he has these templates to build, but our need is more like, hey, this show is going to have 20 episodes and this is the delivery specs. And it's almost like saying, these are delivery specs. We need a 10-second slate. It's going to have this logo at the beginning, and you kind of feed those logos in. It's almost like a mini MAM portal. We were going to start doing this in Cat TV with this catalog is going to be the Inside NFL catalog. And then every week you kind of swap out the show. And then you feed that Cat TV to the CML, and that CML goes to Vantage, because we do that for a couple of jobs you built for us. But we were trying to take it one step further and kind of eliminate Cat TV from the equation.
Okay. Yeah, let's try and talk later this week or next week, Joe, about that. There may be some stuff we can do for you with some kind of unknown mapping matrix capabilities that exist in the product.
Cool.
Oh yeah, and the other thing I would mention too is that a lot of this same work and sort of upstream logic building, also, Dave, we messed around with Transform 2 on a sort of ill-fated project, but not because of Transform.
Yeah.
But again, it's like
an acquisition.
Yeah, but yeah, I know, Joe, you mentioned getting rid of Cat TV, but when I was thinking of not having an interface to put this stuff, I was immediately thinking of just building some dummy field in Cat TV that could be your rule set that maybe somebody could interact with, but then you'd still need to pull the data and have some software interpret it and then write the CML from it You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Good stuff. Well, thanks again, Eric. Really good stuff. All right. So we're going to segue now over to Ted Summer, and I think we mentioned this earlier. You know, Ted's no longer in the Slack channel because he used to be a customer, you know, at WWE, and he liked it so much. You know, you joined the company. Huh?
That's well, what I really wanted was one of those Telestream shirts, and this is the only way to get one. You have to join. Tried every other way. But hey, everybody. So Eric, that was awesome. Thank you for sharing. You know, you took CML and you added it to a million of your workflows, and you really like harnessed the power of it. And you really you emphasize a bunch of key terms which I was going to bring up. One of them is how metadata rules the house, right? That dream workflow that you built up, everybody wants that. And a lot of the customers that I'm starting to meet and talk to now, they all seem to bring up the same thing where we have this huge archive. How can we monetize it? And if we could just throw it through an automated factory that adds in my commercial breaks, maybe puts in some dynamic ad insertion or some Scuddy triggers, put on some slates in the beginning, put some lower thirds graphics, automate the captioning. I'm not paying people to create content or to, you know, zhuzh it up when I've already had it in my archive for so long. It just keeps making me money over and over and over again. So going off that thought, I'm gonna share, let's see here. I'm gonna have to minimize this. You guys see my screen? Yes. But all right. So I was gonna step through some simple, you know, how to build the CML with a work order template, and I can go into that. But I thought, you know, one of the coolest things when I joined and I jumped the fence and I came on the vendor side was learning new tips and tricks about tools that I might already own or I was looking at that I could relate and use inside my own plant to help build up my workflows or help automate tasks that are super mundane or taking up a lot of time from people. So one of the new products that we've had for just a little while is GLIM, and I think you guys are all pretty familiar with it. I know Dave did a pretty good walkthrough at one of the user groups a couple years ago, so I won't go too in depth, but it's a frame accurate file-based player, and it has some really cool built-in features. One of them is you can give users on your network the ability to view content through a lightweight web GUI on your internal network. You can put it over the public internet with some help from your networking team. And that gives you access and control so people can see content that lives on your network storage. And they may be in California and your network storage is in here in Boston, right? So it opens up a huge world of all these collaboration workflows that may have not existed before. And all of those can be powered, and I'm going to get there, and help push CML to Vantage. So let's take a look at GLIM. GLIM right now, I should also mention, the newest version just dropped last week, 2.2. If you don't have it or you're looking for it, we can help you get it. But on the base install, down here in the corner, we have these new plugin packs, right? And these are basically building blocks that can help you connect your GLIM viewing workflows with your Vantage array. And you know, you guys can read. There's some simple building blocks like, oh, pass a backend path. Give me a clip link, right? Make a clip list. But what you can do is you can create your own plugins and load them into GLIM, and then create Vantage workflows that are powered by GLIM and the plugins. And that opens up a whole new world of content creation for teams that maybe don't have access to a full editor, that they can do quick clips and push it out to a social network. They can take clips, stitch them together, pass them then to an editor that can finish them, maybe add some lower thirds, some star wipes, and put it on your social platform. Or pass them to a post-producer workflow where you automate all of those steps using a CML that has a skeleton for your exact social output. This is my 30-second teaser clip. I already have my standard graphics. It goes out the door, bing, bang, boom. You automated the whole workflow. So I went into our lab. I took some of our plugins and I expanded on them. And I basically imagined when I was a customer just a short few weeks ago, some of the I want to say trouble points that a social network or social team might have, and that is getting content out the door as soon as possible so they can monetize it. So while a shoot is going on, if you could take snippets of live clips and start teasing them on your social platforms before the finished product comes on at the end of the night, that would be a million more views. That's a million more Google ads. That's a million more dollars that paid for the whole shoot to begin with before you even aired it on your platform. So I'm just going to take a quick clip. And I should also mention, if you don't know, GLIM also, besides reading finished or closed files on your network storage, maybe hard drives that are directly attached to the server, storage that's connected to your cloud partners, it can also read growing files that are outputted out of Lightspeed Live Capture. So if you're doing a 3-camera shoot and you have everything pointed at Lightspeed Live Capture to capture it, you can have users log into GLIM anywhere in the world and start using those clips as they're being recorded in real time. So I'm just gonna, this is a closed file. Hold on. This is a closed file. I'm just gonna grab some in and out points real quick, just to show you this plugin that I built. So I took some basic building blocks, and there was a little bit more work on the back end, right? I used some examples and I built some stuff, but what I really want to get across is you can take GLIM and build plugins and pass metadata, right? Pass them directly to workflows on the Vantage side, and you have given the power of someone who has either full access to a Vantage workflow designer and can create workflows and whatnot, or you pass it all the way down the chain to a production assistant or someone lower on the level, where now they can contribute to the team and take time-consuming tasks away from those creators. So these fields can obviously all be these are temporary fields, but output name could just be a file for this specific clip, right? We'll just call this, where are we? PBS in Boston, right? We're in Boston. Talent can be me. Here's a unique ID, but these are all rich metadata labels that really mean important things to other workflows downstream in my plan.
Well, and time out. Those fields, location, I can't read what it says.
Unique ID, output name,
Yeah,
talent.
Talent. Those that can all be customized in a label. So you can present whatever fields you want. We're just showing these for effect. And you may want to do that because you want that content from those fields to appear in a slate, okay, or in some other way in the end result product,
or even all the way downstream, and use them to feed Google Analytics when you post this on YouTube. So if people have alerts for Boston content that's featuring this specific talent, you don't have to have someone enter all that. You're literally starting it all the way while the clip is being shot. And you can also bake in decision trees in a workflow. Sure. So let's add a couple more clips to here. Right. So here, we'll add some, let's just say I'm a lightweight, a junior editor, right? And I need to build a clip list for an editor that's going to do a quick 1-minute teaser of my piece that's coming out later. Instead of them searching for the files that are coming in, what they're named, what the time codes are, you can have someone sit here, load up all 3 ISOs that are coming out of the control room, give them some pad, mark the ins and the outs of those specific clips, and then through the plugin that we have built for this specific group or team or department in your field, we can have them all stitched together. We can throw 15 frames of black, and these are all customizable fields. These are all, we could have this passed to other workflows, but we can submit this right to Vantage and continue viewing. We can then look for our next social cue that we want to pass on down. But what happens is, in the background, GLIM is actually not moving files. It's passing a CML, just like Eric was describing, of all the path locations of those growing files, and you're able to use them in real time and help create content with them. So a simple workflow like this. Oh, it's not behaving. I have some decision trees down here. So normally I could have these decide trees get keyed off of variables, right? We could have information baked in, but now with GLIM and our plugins, we're giving the users the power to flip down those decide trees in our workflow. So we're almost taking away processing power off of Vantage, where it doesn't have to analyze a variable or check a frame rate or a resolution to make a decision. We can use the power of a person to decide, okay, this is these 3 clips I wanted stitched and sent down this path. This one clip, I just want to add bumpers and I want to add a quick slate and push it out my social team. But I guess the overall, examples that I wanted to show you is, if you haven't yet already, check out GLIM and check out the plugins and see how they can start working for you. So GLIM is feeding CML from all these inputs and all these times, from all these clips. As I said before, it's another way to add. If you wanted to think about it, during the pandemic, a lot of people had no access to content, right? And one of the ways GLIM shined is it enabled access for people to start viewing content outside of their plants, their networks, their buildings. But sometimes people needed physical access to files so that they could paste them into watch folders to feed Vantage. So now with plugins and CML, we're not moving anything, right? We added a protection layer. Nobody can delete the source clip. Nobody can interrupt the record from Lightspeed Live Capture as it's being viewed in GLIM. All we're doing is passing information via CML to Vantage to start processing. So that's one. I mean, hopefully that spurred some ideas or some discussion between the group. I don't know if any of you have seen plugins or started implementing them on your sites, but does anybody have any questions or any, feedback on how that would help them currently with maybe some of the headaches that they're facing with their production departments?
Could you get access to that clip that you created?
Sure. So that clip was stitched together with 15 seconds of 15 frames of black in between it. And here it is. It's quick, 2 seconds of each one, 15 seconds of black, 15 frames, I'm sorry. So there it is. And third clip should start shortly. So CML, GLIM, and plugins. So something else that I wanted to show you guys. Eric kind of went through, unless you want to take a second, Bob. And
Well, again, we wanted to just present different ways to create CML, and Eric mentioned the workflow portal as being one way. GLIM is just another way to create some CML for particular applications, in this, for stitching primarily. But now Ted's going to show another way, a more common way, and that's using a work order. And maybe before we get into this, Eric, if you're still here, do you have much experience with work orders? Do you have a way of characterizing like when you would use a work order, versus some other method to input that variables?
Yeah, we used to drive a lot of our automation through CSV work orders, basically chucking a spreadsheet and deriving info from it. I actually used one not too long ago for a project here where we had a very large library of baseball games that were not part of the MLB league proper that we needed to chunk through and put on YouTube. And we didn't know much about the files, but we had people who were able to make a spreadsheet that told us all about it. Right. So in that instance, we're using the CSV as a spreadsheet where we're pulling what is the file name, what was the game title, like what teams were there, what's the YouTube description, so that Vantage could just handle it for us.
Excellent. And so it sounds to me, since those weren't MLB events, that they were, that information was not in your MAM. So you needed to reference it in another way. You couldn't do it programmatically, correct?
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of,
Yep.
I think one of my slides mentioned, or just getting to the point, like even on the topic of spreadsheets, like we've all had a really horrifying spreadsheet where you can either make the same tweak to every cell, like 200 cells, or you spend a day figuring out how to do it automatically. And you kind of realize it would have been quicker just to do it by hand. So some of those gray area situations, and including where we're not going to have something in our library, just making a CSV template that you can enforce and just batch process a ton of files to get it done is pretty handy. And I have to say, GLIM is looking really slick. It's
Right
been a
on.
while since I've seen the interface.
Right on. Well, listen, a work order is really powerful. Again, you know, if maybe your assets aren't coming from one place, or you don't have the MAM with the automation interface. So Ted's going to get in here and show you how you can use it.
All right. So this is a very simple and common way to just kind of show new customers who may not know that much about Post Producer, just you know, the very small, powerful processing capabilities about it, which is like creating slates. And Eric touched on this. This same method or idea could be used to add lower thirds all to the same locations on the, you know, on your same output files, or to add closed captioning to move audio channels up and down. But it's basically taking a uniform skeleton and just changing variables on it. So we talked about a work order and CSVs. So here's a basic CSV, right? Let's just pretend we're a post-production house and we have one 15-second commercial, but we have to make a bunch of different iterations of it for all of our downstream partners, right? We have every single language that we can currently think of mapped to our golden source file, right? So we have one source file that comes in that has 32 tracks of audio, and each 2-track pair has an English channel, Spanish, you know, German's on 7 and 8, so on and so forth. But our work order is basically with being paired with a CML, can help the conform action make all these renditions all through the power of automation. So if you don't have a MAM or a master repository where everything lives, you can list everything out in a CSV. And everybody knows how to use Excel for the most part. You can use copy and paste to fill out some columns, right? And each column is mapped to a variable that you have programmed in your CML. So one of the other key factors I saw Eric highlighted in his slideshow too, using a work order, you also have the power of spell check, right? Which I think eliminates a lot of manual error, especially if you're implementing this like in a slating workflow or creating graphics with plain text.
So Ted, if each column represents a variable, what do the rows represent?
So each row is what will fill in on each variable when it's keyed in for each source file or each job in the process of the workflow.
Each row represents a job.
Correct.
So in this workflow, we're gonna do 11 jobs. It looks like.
Yep.
Okay.
So what is this work order actually feeding? Let's take a quick look. So this is our quick slate, right? And just like everybody has, Eric said, they spent a lot of time making sure it's perfect each time. And so he has his CML pointed to pixel points, which is exactly how I'm doing the same thing in my example. So here's my CML for this specific work order. And let me see if I can key these next to each other. I have my variable for agency. It's at this pixel point, right? That's the top left right here. And in that location, with my work order, with that variable, I'm going to have my dynamic text of crazy promos is going to fill in for that variable. Same thing's going to happen for client, right? Here's my next location. Here's my next pixel point. And at that location, here's the instruction set that the CML is going to tell the conform action to do. At this pixel point, For 5 seconds, use Helvetica font, 50 point, bold, and white, and put the text that you have in that row for that job in this specific work order. And all it is mixing, matching. Set them up, knock them down.
So Ted, how did you create that CML?
To be honest, this is a pretty basic default template. I did not create it. Somebody else did it. But I can show you how it was created. So if you take our slate, you open it up in Photoshop, you can help find the pixel points, right? 672 by 200. This is basically what Eric was describing earlier. He was, I think, Eric, you said you were going off of lines, right? And you would do some, you'd submit it through and then either raise it or lower it within your CML to get it correct. This is just another way to do the same thing, but with pinpoint accuracy. This is a 1280 slate. So we throw this grid down in Photoshop. We can find the exact pixel point of where we want to lay our text for our CML. And you can play with, if you do a mock-up, and you are going to do this, right? 150 times, you want to make sure it's right. You can lay the same size font and text in Photoshop and make sure you know exactly what's going to happen once you start putting this workflow to work. So here's my CML, right, which is my instruction set. I have my work order, which I like to call my ingredient list, and I'm about to put it in the conform kitchen. So let's see it work. I have a single job, which is going to process in the background and do the same thing. If I drop the work order that has all 11 jobs, these will all process, but I have this currently running on a VM, and it does not have the horsepower to kick out all the consistently. It won't do it. It will, but it will take a long time. But this one will go quick, and we can watch it in Switch, and we can see this work. So we can step through it, why these are lighting up. The work order is just like your watch folder action. All this is looking for is a CSV. The associate action is passing the work order and matching it up with the CML that I have pointed for this specific workflow. And then conform is taking all the recipe items for each job and using those keyed variables in the CML to kick out the output. So this is almost done, and we'll check it out. And so I have my slate, right? Perfectly filled out. It goes for 5 seconds. And in my conform action, I have my time code restriped. So my spot will start before 1 hour, just so I can include my slate so that doesn't mess up any other broadcast playout systems at my distribution points. But that's it. But this same idea and the same workflow and even work order system, if you don't have a MAM, you can use to key off, like Eric stated, and I'll say it again, lower third workflows that are just quickly templated, adding bumpers before they go out your social distribution channels. You can literally use this to just automate tasks that take so much time with your production department.
So Ted, one of the things that we talked about very early, there's just a couple of us here, is these tools, like, you don't have to own a post-producer license, right? If you're running Vantage version 8, you could actually run this in the cloud. So could you just briefly show how you could convert that workflow that you just did to run in the cloud?
Sure.
Okay.
So with version 8, update pack 5, we have now some cloud connectors that are fully open to use, right? So you can drop these down. You can also enable cloud port actions. So you can turn some of our standard actions to cloud port, but you can export this workflow. Is that what you want to do? And bring it up to cloud port?
No, click on conform and just
bring it up. So we can turn on cloud mode, and now with cloud port, with leveraging our pay-per-use model for licensing, you can run this post-producer workflow without having the physical on-site license.
And you would just need to amend the workflow now to reference files that are presumably up in S3, right?
Yeah, so you would have
Okay.
to do, it's not as easy as just turning it on, but you'd have to use, there's several ways to do it, just like every Vantage workflow, but you can use our location markers, but your cloud instance of Vantage has to be able to access the media. So whether you move it up there for it to be conformed, or you have it up in S3 already and you use pre-signed URLs, or you have it in a data store that's connected in your Telestream cloud account, you can operate all your cloud workflows that way.
And that's probably the biggest step, is just referencing
your
the cloud
media.
location in the cloud. Okay. But as Ted showed you, to access the cloud version of Conform, it's just a right click on that media. Okay. And then having a Telestream cloud account. So anyway, so you can definitely stick your toe in the water before you jump in. Okay. Good stuff.
Quick question about that that S3 access. Does it have to be like auth secret key, or can you use IAM roles?
Per workflow?
Just for your, yeah. Like I know that like for like a watch action, I think it's just auth secret key, but I was wondering if there's a way to use IAM roles instead.
I don't know the answer definitively to that question. Maybe Dave Norman would chime in.
Yeah, Dave, that's been asked before. Are you still here?
He stepped away a little while ago.
He did, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll ping you.
I'll find out. Is that Jake?
Yeah, it's Jake.
All right, I'll find out and I'll get back to you.
Thanks.
Excellent. Well, just to summarize, we wanted to show a couple of different ways to create CML, using GLIM, using a work order. Eric referenced earlier that you can, from an NLE, okay, you could export a Final Cut XML from Premiere or Final Cut. You can also export an AAF from Avid. An AAF doesn't support as many features in CML as the Final Cut XML. Okay. And one of the files that I referenced, the post producer guide, gets into the differences between the AAF and the XML, but that can be used. So so those are some ways to create CML, the workflow portal, writing XML directly, or creating it programmatically. That's five or six different ways that you could create CML directly or create XML that can be converted into CML. And then once you have your CML created, it's about creating your variables. And Eric talked a lot about when he's doing it programmatically, he's creating CML and defining his variables simultaneously. Okay. Whereas in Ted's example, we had CML that was created in one process, and then separately we were ingesting variables via the work order. Anyways, there's a lot here tonight. This is kind of a very detailed discussion, but also hopefully very practical in some ways. I'm starting to wrap up. I mean, before we close, I mean, does anybody have any questions? Anything else they want to share?
I'll share it too. There's a new version of multi-screen that just released. If you guys, that just literally came out today. So if you guys are looking for that, please reach out and we can help you get that. There was a new Flip 64 release just a couple weeks ago. If you're looking for that component pack, please reach out. And GLIM 2.2, that just came out literally last week. So if you need a new version or new component pack and you can't find it on the download site, please feel free to reach out to Bob or myself.
Excellent. Well, listen, I want to thank everybody once again for attending, for contributing, for being part of it. I want to thank our hosts here at WGBH, Steve and Glenn. Really appreciate it. First in-person user group since 2019. Probably, I don't know when the next one will be. It might be, we might try to get one in by the end of this year, or more likely early next year, but would love to do it again in person, somewhere. So if you're interested in hosting a Vantage users group, please let me know over the coming months. Otherwise, thanks again. Hope to see you guys at NAB New York, if not before. Have a good night, everybody.